God is on the side of the oppressed. Throughout my spiritual journey, my beliefs have evolved a lot over the years, as I'm sure yours has too. But something that remains true for me is the certainty that God chooses the side of the oppressed. It was Christmas a few days ago, and that's the message of Christmas too. The incarnation, God with us. God made flesh through the poor and powerless Jesus, born to a family of refugees in a land occupied by Rome. Today, that land is occupied by the modern state of Israel, supported and funded largely by the United States, the empire I'm in. And as of today, the Israeli government has killed over 20,000 people in Palestine since October 7th. And it angers me that so many Western Christians support all this death and destruction. I'm going to show you some clips from a Palestinian Lutheran pastor named Mutar Isaac, and he gave this sermon on December 23rd in his church in Bethlehem. And in his church, in the city where Jesus was born, they have this statue of the baby Jesus in this manger scene, except baby Jesus is surrounded by rubble, to show that if Jesus were born today, he would be born under the rubble.
More than 20,000 killed. Thousands are still under the rubble. Close to 9,000 children killed in the most brutal ways. Day after day, 1.9 million displaced, hundreds of thousands of homes destroyed. Gaza, as we know it, no longer exists. This is an annihilation. This is a genocide.
This is a historic moment where you must know where you stand. Where do you stand while this genocide is happening? And it saddens me and it angers me to see so many people justifying all this death and destruction. Like, when you look at two sides of an argument here of when, at least between people who actually know what they're talking about, one side isn't saying that Israel's committing all this violence and the other side saying, no, they're not. No, it's the other side saying, yes, but sometimes it's justified. Sometimes it's necessary to do all this violence. That's what we're talking about here. I don't want to hear, but the Bible says. I don't want to hear, but Hamas. What about Hamas? 20,000 people killed and counting, day after day after day after day. This is more than retaliation. This is brutal punishment. And there's a part of this sermon where he references the story in Luke 9 when Jesus and his disciples are rejected by a Samaritan village, and then James and John ask Jesus, should we call fire down from the heavens and consume them? And Jesus rebukes them just for suggesting that. And Mutar Isaac says this is empire theology. And this is what they're saying about Palestinians today, thinking it's justified to call down fire from the heavens on them. And they deserve to be rebuked too. And he says that Gaza today has become the moral compass of the world, and that Gaza was hell before October 7th, and the world was silent.
And the world was silent. Should we be surprised at their silence now? If you are not appalled by what is happening in Gaza, if you are not shaken to your core, there is something wrong with your humanity. And if we as Christians are not outraged by the genocide, by the weaponization of the Bible to justify it, there is something wrong with our Christian witness, and we are compromising the credibility of our gospel message. If you fail to call this a genocide, it is on you. It is a sin and a darkness you willingly embrace.
I've wanted to make this video for a while, but it's been really hard because every time I think about Palestine and what's been happening for decades or do any sort of research, I'm so devastated that I don't want to make anything or post anything on the internet. And it's awesome that people are able to and get information out there and counter a lot of the propaganda that's been out there. But it's hard. I know a lot of you watching this could probably relate. It's just so devastating. So right now, I feel like all I can say is what I've said so many times before, that God is on the side of the oppressed. Why does that matter? Because we should all flourish in this world that God gave us. Every single one of us. And so our faith should draw us toward solidarity with the oppressed, with those who struggle to flourish more than others, so that we can end all sorts of oppression. That's the work of God. That's what the incarnation calls us to. God is under the rubble.
In our pain, anguish, and lament, we have searched for God and found him under the rubble in Gaza. Jesus himself became the victim of the very same violence of the empire when he was in our land. He was tortured, crucified. He bled out as others watched. He was killed and cried out in pain, "My God, where are you?" In Gaza today, God is under the rubble. And in this Christmas season, as we search for Jesus, he is not to be found in the side of Rome, but our side of the wall. He is in a cave with a simple family, an occupied family. He's vulnerable, barely and miraculously surviving a massacre himself. He's among the refugees, among a refugee family. This is where Jesus is to be found today. If Jesus were to be born today, he would be born under the rubble in Gaza.
For a lot of us, this conception of God and Jesus and faith is totally foreign. You're used to people using God to justify all sorts of violence. But there's always been this stream throughout history of people who were empowered by this story to be in solidarity with the victims of violence and to work toward ending that violence. People who use God to justify violence have such a small view of God, a tiny God that's just like them, who so conveniently happens to hate all the people they hate. But I believe God is bigger than that. I believe God is what stretches our imaginations wider to see things from other people's perspectives and to think of new ways of structuring society and to choose more creative ways of responding to tragedy than sending fire down from the heavens, destroying people and their homes day after day after day. I hope you all can find new ways to stretch your imagination during this time. We need it now more than ever. Watch one more clip from this sermon. This is really important.
When we glorify pride and richness, Jesus is under the rubble. When we rely on power, might, and weapons, Jesus is under the rubble. When we justify, rationalize, and theologize the bombing of children, Jesus is under the rubble. Jesus is under the rubble. This is his manger. He is at home with the marginalized, the suffering, the oppressed, and the displaced. This is his manger. And I have been looking and contemplating on this iconic image. God with us precisely in this way. This is the incarnation. Messy, bloody, poverty. This is the incarnation. And this child is our hope and inspiration. We look and see him in every child killed and pulled from under the rubble. While the world continues to reject the children of Gaza, Jesus says, just as you did to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. You did it to me. Jesus not only calls them his own, he is them. He is the children of Gaza.
You can watch the full sermon in the link in the description, and I strongly suggest you do so. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.